I sat on the edge of a cliff overlooking my city like a comic book vigilante. The solitude I'd sought when I'd come here hadn't materialized. I wanted silence. I wanted the world to be quiet, if only for a moment, so I could gather my thoughts. Even up here, I could see the noise of the city. I could feel the buzz of its life, a bustling life. Below me, the sounds of that life echoed through the air, finding me. I could not escape it. Only death could provide the silence I needed. I could hear the loud howling of sirens, as if lamenting the fate of an unfortunate victim. Airplanes rumbled through the air. Even the unseen animals around me seemed to be in turmoil. The hooting of owls, the howling of coyotes, even the barking of domestic dogs filled the air. In the distance, city lights flickered with untold stories. Some of them would be erotic. Others would be violent and sordid. There were even stories that combined both. Literally thousands upon thousands of stories were unfolding at this very moment. For example, at the beginning of the evening, a woman was laying out her clothes for a date. Her obscenely large closet had an extensive closet from which to choose. She settled on a new cocktail dress she had recently purchased. When she'd bought it, she hadn't had any plans for the event. She just saw it, wanted to have it, and bought it without a second thought. She often did things this way. The numbers on the price tag were immaterial to her. She hardly even looked at it. No matter how many times she used her credit card, she was never turned down. It was almost like magic, an endless well that never ran dry. This happy woman was preparing to look her best. She wanted her companion to appreciate her beauty. And what woman doesn't want that? Her $150 perfume was ready to be sprayed in key places for a subtle but intoxicating scent. She took a long, leisurely bath with scented bath salts. Then she carefully styled her hair and applied her makeup with the precision of an artist. Afterward, she dressed in front of the full-length mirror, making sure everything was perfect. Her cell phone rang, interrupting the ceremony. She cast a quick glance at the screen, smiled understandingly, and answered with a throaty, seductive greeting. The conversation was short, but there were plenty of hints in it. Finished tidying herself up, she took one last spin in front of the mirror. She liked her reflection and smiled confidently. She left the room and, bouncing in place, headed out into the night. Why did I describe her preparation in such detail? Because how meticulously she prepared for a night out was very strange, considering the fact that her husband was out of town. Is it possible for a woman to prepare like that for a casual date with friends? Of course, it was possible. However, in this case, it was unlikely. How do I know? Because I knew the woman, and more importantly, the person she was going to meet. I understood why she waited until her husband was out of town before making plans with this man. Her flirtatious conversation confirmed my worst fears. She had opened doors to areas within me that I didn't even know existed. Anger, hatred. I was disgusted to even think about it. She disgusted me. I loved her with everything I had. I owed her everything. But right now, she was everything I hated about women. I know I shouldn't think that way. Men are taught to respect women. It's our job to love, protect, and cherish them, even understand them. It's probably too difficult a task for most men, but we try anyway. We are taught to put women on a pedestal. Even at an early age, boys are indoctrinated that girls are sugar and spice and all that. The very first woman we meet is our mother who gave birth to us. And then we choose as our life partner the woman who we hope will bear us children. These beneficent acts are supposed to make us feel honored. But when you think about it, the story turns out to be incomplete. After all, do they create life on their own? So what do we owe women really? Respect? Absolutely. The same respect we should have for people in general. But why do so many people think we owe them more respect than men? They don't say it in so many words, but society in general values women's lives more highly than men's. In sitcoms and comedies about family life, wives are always portrayed as hot, smart women who have the unpleasant duty of cleaning up after the bumbling troublemakers they're married to or fixing their messes. Father Knows Best has been replaced by Everybody Loves Raymond. I'm not casting aspersions on that show, I like it. It's just an example. What does all of this mean? It means that we treat the ladies as if everything they do and say is non-judgmental. What they say should be taken as gospel, even if it isn't. They are only wrong when they want to admit it. In fact, forced to admit it after exhausting all other options. Other times, men are told to keep their mouths shut if they want peace. Why has doubting women or holding them responsible for what they say or do become synonymous with misogyny? They do this to us all the time. Why is a double standard wrong unless it's in favor of the weaker sex? When men cheat, they are labeled as the worst kind of people. When women cheat, it is often assumed that her husband has let her down. Calling a man an asshole is part of pop culture. Why am I delusional? Do I hate women? Is this the whiny monologue of a hurt man who now looks at the opposite sex with contempt? Am I a misogynist? Do you see how fair questions turn into labeling? Before you stop reading and write me off as some woman-hating, anti-feminist asshole, I should tell you why I'm sitting on this cliff asking these questions. This afternoon, my entire view of the world was completely shattered. Everything I was taught in my youth was turned upside down in a matter of minutes. Everything my parents told me about marriage was a lie. My mom told me lies about what to expect if you treat women well. My father told me lies about being a real man. They shaped my idea of what life should be like when I got married. They are the reason I've been sitting on the edge of this cliff, literally and figuratively. I think I need to go back to the beginning. Maybe then we can understand how I got here. We can see how I ended up on this cliff. 4 years ago. That's a good woman you got there, son. Take care of her. Respect her. Be the kind of man I taught you to be. My father glowed with pride as he said this to me. He pulled me to him and gave me a manly hug, patting me sternly on the back. I will, Dad. I will. After a brief hug, we pulled away. Standing in one of the back rooms of the church, dressed in matching tuxedos, we waited for the appointed time to walk down the aisle toward my future. I could hear the excited hum of the crowd in the sanctuary. Where's Mom? He smiled and hummed. You know your mom. She's barking orders at the bridesmaids, driving everyone crazy. Even the priest got a taste. A look of concern appeared on my face. Daddy, please don't let her drive Tabby crazy, especially not today. This is about me and her, not Mom. You know how she gets when everything has to be perfect. Son, relax. Your mom is just excited and trying to make sure everything goes well. She's been dreaming of this moment since she first held you in her arms. Daddy? Son, look at me, my dad interrupted me in a stern voice, placing both hands on my shoulders. He took a deep breath, showing that he wanted me to do the same. I followed his example. You're nervous. I know what you're going through. I've been through it myself. Every man goes through it. If you weren't nervous, I'd be worried. I nodded in agreement with his words and took another deep breath. Calm down, he continued. There's nothing to stop Tabby from marrying you. Nothing. She loves the hell out of you. Not even your mother could drive her crazy enough to change her mind. You're right, I said, trying to calm my nerves. My stomach was in knots. This was that moment, the moment of truth. I would dedicate my life to Tabitha and officially vow to always be faithful to her. I loved Tabby with all my heart. I didn't want any woman but her. And yet the thought of being her husband for the rest of my life was a little overwhelming. After all, I was only 23. If I lived to be 85, the rest of my life would be 62 years. What if my love for her wasn't strong enough? What if I wasn't a good enough husband? What if she looks back and realizes she made a terrible mistake marrying me? What if someone better comes along? What if... My father must have read my dark thoughts. Once again, he brought me out of them. I want you to think about me and your mom. Look at us. I've been married to her for 17 years, and not a day goes by that I don't regret it. You and her are the most precious thing I have, and without you, my life would be empty. I love her as much as I did when I saw her in her wedding dress. She's my everything. Things haven't always been easy between us. After all, I'm 9 years older than her. Because of the age difference, we have a hard time at times. We fight, we quarrel, but we always get through it. She knows I'm not going anywhere. After all is said and done, we each know we have a partner for life. Nothing can keep us apart. I won't let it, and neither will she. Trust me, son, this is what you want. When you wake up decades from now and your son is walking down the aisle, you'll be proud to tell him the same thing. Tears came to my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I had pride, after all. Instead, I gave a quick snort, and to avoid an awkward display of emotion, I jokingly asked, "What if I have a girl?" It took him a moment to realize what I had done, but he agreed. He smiled and said, "Then you'll keep trying until you have a boy. I want a grandson." "Yes, sir, I'll do it for you." When I said that, his face contorted a little, and I asked, "Too much?" "Yes, a little," he quickly replied with a short nod. We then burst into laughter as he shook his head in feigned disgust. I was so glad he was here with me again. I couldn't have picked a better best man. He was the only man I considered at all. Even my best friend Robbie was no comparison to my father. Henry was technically my stepfather. My real father left when I was 2 years old. I never found out the exact circumstances under which he decided to leave us. My mother mentioned him as rarely as possible. The only thing I can remember, vaguely, is that my stepfather married my mother when I was 6, and they dated for a year before that. So Henry was the only father I knew. He was an example of what a real man should be. The wedding went off without a hitch. Tabby was truly the most beautiful woman in the room. When I saw her, all my doubts melted away. I knew I'd made the best choice. I recited my vows to her, reading every word. I listened to her say hers. Tears of happiness flowed from her eyes. When I was finally able to kiss my bride, I made a promise to myself to never let her go. And I never let go. Throughout all 4 years of my marriage, my parents have been there for me. For both of us. They helped us through our first major fight. My mom taught Tabby how to cook Thanksgiving meals, and my dad was always there to give me advice. Our marriage was what it was meant to be, and my parents played a big part in that. I tried to be as much of a husband to Tubby as Dad was to Mom. His favorite saying was, "A happy wife is a happy life." He lived his life by that motto. He taught me the importance of always taking care of your woman. I know now that it was all a load of crap. The present. Until today, I thought my father was the wisest man on earth. Until today, I tried to model my marriage after his and my mom's. Until today, I had everything. I had a beautiful life with a beautiful wife. Both my parents were alive. I worked side by side with my father, who owned a chain of computer stores. Our stores repaired computers, but our most profitable business was selling custom computers and components over the internet. Most of our customers were avid gamers or people who needed quality computers. Our website was designed to help the customer find what they needed, whether they were a computer guru or someone assembling their first computer. We had it all worked out. Was I really just blind? Had I not noticed all the warning signs? Was life so good that trouble was impossible? As I looked over the edge of the cliff, I saw nothing but utter darkness directly below me. Faint city lights flickered and danced in the distance, but beneath my feet I was met with nothing but nothingness. No answers. No escape from the crushing realization I was facing. What was I supposed to do? How could I continue the relationship knowing that everything it was built on was a lie? Today afternoon. I love Sundays. My weeks revolved around them. Most people live on Saturdays, but I don't think those people are married. My Saturdays were meant for Tabby. These were the days I did my favors for her. Nice to-do lists, date nights, shopping so I could give my manly opinion, as well as a credit card. Whatever she needed, I was there for her. But Sunday was the holiest day, and I don't mean church. I could do whatever I wanted on Sunday. It was a kind of unwritten rule that just fell into place. Tabby understood this, albeit subconsciously, so she usually found something else to do. In the colder months, I had football. In the summer, I took leisurely rides on my Ducati. Other than that, I worked on my truck, went to the gym, hung out with my best friend Robbie, or just sat in my boxers and did nothing. Sounds pretty fantastic, doesn't it? This Sunday was supposed to be the exception to the rule. My dad and I had to go out of town to meet with representatives of a company that had just acquired one of our major suppliers. One of the buyer's first moves was to raise the prices on many of the parts we purchased from them. This would have a big impact on our profit margin. So my father arranged a meeting at one of the central locations. He brought me along with him, as well as a few other key people. We planned to negotiate and try to come to acceptable terms. Since we had a long-standing relationship with the former company, we hoped that we would be able to accomplish this. For me, it was an opportunity to get to know the other guys as well as the new owners. I actually didn't know the other guys as well as my dad would have liked. Most of them were his age, so I didn't have much to hold on to. Besides, in their minds, I was just his son. Nothing more. Since I had started working with my father, he had been preparing me for a more active role. This was the perfect opportunity to reintroduce me to them as a key figure. As fate would have it, this meeting was to take place on the worst possible weekend. On Super Bowl weekend Lee. The Patriots had gotten their way, once again, and I wanted to see Tom Brady make history with his 5th championship. Even though I knew the game wouldn't be all that interesting, and that the Patriots would just defeat the Falcons early, I wanted to see it. The meet was on Saturday, so the plan was to fly into the central location on Friday, have the meet on Saturday, and fly back Sunday morning. Robbie always threw the best Super Bowl parties. Indeed, he threw the best parties in general. That was his thing. He was the fun friend, and I was the responsible one. That dynamic hadn't changed since my high school days. We had a long tradition of watching the big games together. NBA Finals, Super Bowls, Final Four, etc. And we were both big Patriots fans. They've been to 6 Super Bowls since Robbie started the tradition, and the 2 times I missed the party, they lost. My friends blame me for those losses. They really did. If you don't follow sports, you won't understand. If you do, you can feel my pain. I should have been there. You know what they say about best laid plans. As luck would have it, there were no flights home before the match. All the tickets were booked. The only thing to do was, of course, to reschedule. That's what I thought. But the representatives of the new company had other plans. No amount of persuasion to reschedule the meeting worked. They had busy schedules, and this was the only free time they had. Coincidentally, they were from Dallas. I'm sure their lack of interest in the Super Bowl had nothing to do with the Cowboys botching it once again. My dad tried to cheer me up. He decided to throw a Super Bowl party in the suite we were renting. It was a nice gesture, and I tried to be grateful, but I was still depressed. Nevertheless, I was a team player. I put on a manly face and brought my game. We arrived on Friday, and each of us strategized on how to approach the meet. We wanted to make sure we were alert and sharp as a razor. The next day, we had a meeting. Funny thing is, we spent so much time practicing our game plan that we unwittingly began to see the reps as the enemy. We were prepared to play hardball and didn't believe a word they said. The reality turned out to be somewhat anticlimactic. They were human beings just like us. They didn't come in expensive suits and condescending attitudes. They were warm, polite, open, and even joked with us. However, when we got to the point of negotiating, things got serious. We told them what we wanted. They told us what they could do. My father politely pointed out our reputation and how much business we had done with their predecessors. He hinted that they wouldn't want to lose the business if they couldn't satisfy us. The reps had to get on the phone with their main office, and we eventually came to a favorable resolution. The assholes in Washington could learn a lot from small businesses that disagree, but listen to each other. Eventually, they compromise and solve the problem in a way that satisfies everyone. But we're not politicians, are we? If it were easy, anyone could do it, but I digress. We were very happy with the way things went. Although I should have been happier, I was still very upset that I missed the party. A real party. I know my dad meant well, but Robbie's parties always turn out great. He knew how to make a bar mitzvah fun. Hanging out with a bunch of old people in a suite seemed incomparable. On top of that, if the Pats lost, I'd be in deep shit. Not that there was any risk of them losing. The game probably would have been over in the first half. But you can never be too careful. Eventually, Dad suggested I take a plane to a neighboring town, rent a car, and just drive the rest of the way home. I might not make it in time for the kickoff, but at least I could make it in time for the second half with a friend. You know, that's why I love it. I was able to change my flight, after shelling out a tidy sum to the airline, of course, and book a compact car for the trip. My dad and the other guys still wanted to stay and watch the game in the suite. They were veteran husbands. You know the kind of guys. They've been married for over a decade. They cherish the time away from the old ball and chain and squeeze out every ounce of freedom they can get. That's why I was able to get home early. Isn't that what always happens when some momentous discovery is made? Damn cliches. I hate them. In the end, it's always the little decisions that add up. Maybe it's fate or just happenstance, but often we find that a small deviation from the intended path can have huge consequences. I practically created a sonic boom with a Nissan Versa I rented while rushing down the highway. I didn't realize these cars could go so fast. I listened to the game on the radio and was not happy. Not happy. The score was 14-0, and the Falcons had just thrown an interception. I had to make it in time. I knew Robbie and the rest of my buddies were cursing the ground I was walking on. By the time I got home, it was almost half an hour later, and I found that Tabby wasn't home. I was hoping to surprise her, but then I remembered that she and my mom were supposed to be spending this weekend together. I called her cell phone. She picked up on the second ring and greeted me as usual. We had a fairly normal conversation. I decided not to let her know I was home. I figured if I kept my mouth shut, I wouldn't be expected to be at the house before curfew. I could make it to Robbie's before the second half started, and then hang out with my buddies late as I wanted. Hell, I could even stay at Robbie's for the night, which gave me the green light to drink myself into oblivion. With the score the way it was now, it seemed necessary. By the time she realizes there's been a change of plans, if she finds out at all, I can just play dumb and apologize for forgetting to let her know. Everyone who reads this story can salvage their decision. I'm sure hundreds of other men have done this, and worse. I was preparing to end the conversation. I was thinking of a good exit strategy to go to Robbie. I asked, "You're with your mom, right?" I assumed I was, so I wasn't looking for an answer. It was just a good exit to tell her, "Have fun and I'll see you later." Yeah, I'm with my mom," she said in a strange voice after some hesitation. For some reason, it immediately piqued my interest. The hesitation seemed strange, and the tone of her voice indicated a lie. Becoming a little more attentive, I asked, "Are you at our house or my parents'?" I looked around the empty house to see if she'd take the bait. "At their house. Why?" she asked, a little defensive. I almost breathed a sigh of relief that she didn't say, "at our place," but then I noticed her tone was aggressive. At first I was curious, but now I was wary. Something was definitely off about her. It was one of those things that are hard to describe, but if you know the person, you can sense it. "No reason. Just miss you, that's all," I said, trying to break the tension. I didn't want to get into an argument. I knew how this conversation would go, and it would inevitably lead to me being upset, but getting nowhere. "Do you guys have anything planned?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Oh yeah, you know us. We're quite the party people," she joked sarcastically. Then she said, "Hey, I gotta go." Was it just me? Or was she rushing me to answer? All right, sweetie. Be sure to use protection if you pick up any strange guy. I love you and we'll talk soon, I said before we ended the conversation. We used to joke like that a lot, so I didn't pay much attention to it. It was like that until there was a pause before she replied again. I love you too, Dre. Bye. I had already grabbed my keys and headed for the exit. Why was she acting so weird? I had to find out. My parents' house wasn't too far away from Robbie's house, so I wouldn't be stopping by on my way out. I didn't want to give up my freedom, but something was annoying me. I had to take the risk. I got to my people's house and, since I had a key, quietly went inside. I expected to see Mom and Tabby in the living room, but it was empty. I quietly went upstairs to see if they were in the bedroom watching TV or something. I didn't find them there either, but I did find something else. The bedroom was pretty big, so my mom didn't notice when I opened the door slightly. She was standing in front of the mirror, holding a dress in front of her. It was a cocktail dress. I tried to discreetly look around for my wife, but I didn't see her. Some part of me wanted to make my presence known, but something was wrong. My intuition told me to be quiet for a while and wait, which I did. I just watched her. She hummed while looking at herself. In the background, I could hear the murmuring of the water in the bathtub. On her dressing table were various cosmetics lying around as if they were being prepared for application. For a woman whose husband was out of town, it seemed strange. My world crumbled when her phone rang. She looked at the screen, smiled, and picked up. "What is it, Charles?" she said with feigned irritation. Her voice was flirty and playful. I gasped, feeling the sickening punch of Bernard Hopkins hit my stomach. Charles was my biological father's name. My mom never talked about him. She refused to answer any questions about him. I always assumed he was long gone. Was this the same Charles? If so, why was she talking to him, and in that tone of voice? And if it was a different Charles, the questions remained the same. It got worse. "You've been impatient for the entire 30 years I've known you, and it doesn't get any better," she said again in the same tone, answering my question and confirming my fears. "I'm already getting ready." She listened for a moment and then giggled. "Oh my God, you're so bad. No, I'm not doing this, okay? I'm not a street hooker, you know." Another listen. Then a giggle. "Yes, but it's not that easy with me, at least not always. I admit that your charms have a certain effect on me. But I am a married woman. It's not easy enough for you to keep your hands to yourself as it is." She listened for another moment, and then her face darkened. "Stop it. Stop it now. I'm married to him, okay? You had your chance with me, and you blew it. You abandoned me. I loved you with everything I had to give, and you just walked away. I still love you, I admit that. But I'm a lot smarter now than I was then. I may not love Henry the same way, but that doesn't mean I'd leave him to be with you. Love isn't everything. I've learned that through experience. You taught me that. So don't think that just because I give in to you every now and then, you get a second chance. We have fun. That's all. If you can't accept that, then feel free to leave. You don't have to leave this time." At that moment, my heart died. My mother, the woman I thought all women should emulate, had turned out to be a liar. She was a liar and a cheat. She was the kind of woman I was advised to stay away from. How could she do that to my father? How could she do that to me? After all these years of lecturing me on how to treat women and telling me to look up to my father as an example of a real man. Is that how women treat real men? I should have confronted her. I should have stormed into the room yelling and screaming at her. But I didn't. I couldn't. No matter what she did, she was still my mom. So I left. I just hid, got in my car, and drove away. I drove aimlessly for a while until I stopped at this cliff. What was I supposed to do? I wanted to stay on solid ground, figuratively speaking. I wanted to return to my naive existence, but it was gone. They say there are moments that make you grow up. The death of a parent, the serious illness of a loved one, or the breakup of a close relationship usually tops that list. I was lucky in that respect. I was spared these tragedies, at least for the moment. But it was just as bad. This was my moment, my crisis. I felt 10 years older than I had a few hours earlier when I rented a car to drive home. I couldn't bring myself to do what I knew I had to do. I was supposed to jump. I had to fall towards the death that awaited me. The death I spoke of was not physical. The death that awaited me was the death of the ideals I had been taught. The death of a little boy who thought his parents were perfect. I didn't know what would end up at the bottom, how I would land, or what the consequences would be. All I knew was that something had to die. I had to jump and accept what was right in front of my face. I had to tell my dad. He had to find out. It would hurt him and probably make Mom furious. Oddly enough, she hadn't raised me to be a liar. I wasn't going to start doing that just because she was. I would tell the truth. Having made my decision, I got back in my car and drove home. It was getting pretty late. I had completely forgotten that I was supposed to be out of town and that I was missing Super Bowl LI, which I later regretted. Those who saw it know what I mean. When I walked in the door, Tabby was home. She looked at me twice before greeting me. "Honey, I thought you were coming back tomorrow," she said, hugging me. "I did, but it didn't go as expected," I muttered, taking off my coat. I walked over to the couch and sat down. Suddenly, I felt tired. It was like the whole world was resting on my shoulders. "Did everything go well?" she asked with concern in her voice, sitting down next to me. I didn't answer her anything. I just shook my head, and tears started dripping from my eyes. "Andre, you're scaring me. What's wrong? Is your dad okay?" All I could do was shake my head. Then she asked in a trembling voice, "Is he home?" I was so exhausted I almost let it pass my ears. It was something so insignificant that it could have been ignored. But my senses were attuned. Even subconsciously, I was looking for all the clues I'd missed over the years. I looked into Tabby's eyes. The hesitation in her voice when she asked if my father was home spoke volumes, but the look in her eyes finally confirmed my suspicions. She knew. "Where have you been today?" I asked sharply, abruptly changing my entire appearance. The haggard voice was replaced by a stern, inquisitive, perhaps questioning tone. My eyes narrowed as I looked at her. The tears had stopped. I was still sad, but I was quickly starting to get angry. I remembered our previous conversation. She said she was with my mother at her house. That had been a lie. "Huh?" she asked. The look on her face could have expressed bewilderment, but I saw fear. "Tonight, when I called, I asked where you were. You said you were with your mom. Remember?" Uh, oh yeah. I was with her." She spoke quickly, her eyes darting from side to side. "How long were you with her? What did you do? When did you leave?" I asked, not even trying to hide the accusatory tone of the questions. She looked at me nervously, picking her words. "Andre, we... why are you acting like this?" "Just answer the questions, Tabby. They should be easy." "Andre, just answer the damn questions!" I yelled furiously, jumping up from the couch like it was on fire. My fists were clenched so hard that my knuckles turned red. Her face turned into a mask of fear and horror. She looked at me with eyes so wide you'd think she was wearing bifocal glasses. She sat stunned at first, but then she suddenly jumped up from the couch and ran into our bedroom, slamming the door behind her. I collapsed back onto the couch as all the energy drained from my body. I just sat there, letting the realization of what was happening overwhelm me. Finding out about my mother was a disaster. Knowing that Tabby was involved was even worse. About 15 minutes later, she reappeared in the living room doorway. I didn't even hear her approaching footsteps. "You know, right?" she asked, voicing the stupidest question I'd ever heard. "And so do you," I replied curtly. I didn't look at her. but out of the corner of my eye, I noticed her nodding sadly. Her expression was wistful, and streaks of tears were running down her makeup. So were you going to tell me, or were you going to keep lying? I asked with an eerie calm. Andre, it's not that simple. Really? I turned to face her, looking her in the eye. It's not that simple? That's your answer for lying to me? Honey, I just didn't want you to get hurt. She's your mother. You look up to her. I knew it would kill you. That excuse pissed me off. Bullshit, Tabby! Bullshit! You weren't just lying to protect me. You were covering for her. Tears streamed down her face again, and she cried silently. Usually her tears moved me, but now I just didn't care. It's not like that. I mean, I lied to you, but She tried to explain. Coming up with nothing, she sighed sadly and moved her hair out of her face. I hated lying to you, Dre, she finally said, lowering her gaze. I sighed and shook my head. More bullshit, Tabby. You had no problem lying to me. No problem at all. You did it so convincingly that it makes me wonder what else you were lying about. The crying stopped when I said that. She wiped her wet cheeks and snorted, but her eyes narrowed as they fell on me. What does that mean? She asked with a note of anger in her voice. I didn't answer at first. I could see we were at an impasse. I could put off this conversation until my feelings were more stable. Maybe that's what I should have done. But you know what? She was the one who lied to me, who knows how many times. She was the one who was wrong. I'm tired of being the scapegoat for the women in my life. I'm tired of being the guy who always puts their feelings before my own. That's Daddy's way. Look at what he's accomplished. You never answered my question. Where were you today? What are you implying? She asked, taking a defiant step forward. Her eyes stopped on mine. I'm not implying anything. I'm asking you a question, one that you still haven't given me a straight answer to. I was with my mom, if you must know, she said reproachfully. Do you mind if I call her to confirm your story? She looked like I'd punched her in the face. So now you don't trust me? Was she really offended that I didn't trust her after catching her in an outright lie? Really? Why would I trust a liar? I asked coldly. There was such anger building up in her after those words that I wouldn't be surprised if steam came out of her ears and a whistling sound was heard. You know what? You know what? She screamed. Her lips tightened as she spoke. I waited for the second half of her words, but it never came. I wasn't sure if she was too angry to finish, or if she just didn't have any plans other than, you know what. Instead, she just glared at me. I wasn't done yet. Speaking of being a liar, have you ever cheated on me? She laughed sarcastically, putting her hands on her hips and shaking her head. Then her face contorted into a wicked smile. No, Andre, I never cheated on you. I'm not a whore. Only your mother does that, she said, mocking me. There are no words to describe the surge of emotions that rushed through me. Her words hit the target with sniper precision. I was so angry that I couldn't think of something so clever to say back to her. I couldn't even argue with her words, which made me even angrier. She crossed her arms and smirked, daring me to reply. She knew she had done me good. Her arrogant demeanor pissed me off even more. Screw you, Tabby! You're a goddamn liar! Worse, you lied to protect the woman who's cheating on you. If a liar defends another liar who is cheating, it's logical to assume that the first liar is also cheating. Her face reflected a mixture of confusion and annoyance, and she croaked, "What?" in a high, squeaky voice. She made it sound like my words were so ridiculous that they couldn't be answered. Let me make it easy for you. Birds of the same feather cheat together. You had no problem defending a cheater, which leads me to believe you see no problem with it. Hell, you even made sure it happened by providing an alibi. The only person who would do that is someone who doesn't mind cheating. Tabby was about to issue a rebuttal, but changed her mind. Instead, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Andre, I know today has been a big shock to you. Do you understand? I understand. Now you're saying things you don't mean. So why don't we just go to bed and put this conversation off until later? I don't want us to say things we can't take back. Her voice was comforting in an attempt to reassure me. I saw it as patronizing. No, Tabby, no, you can't do this. I jabbed my finger in the air, pointing at her. You lied to me. Do you understand that? Do you get that? You goddamn lied to me. To your goddamn husband. You lied to me to protect her. You don't get it, because I have never lied to you. So don't sit here and patronize me like I'm some out-of-control kid who needs a timeout. That's not what I was doing, Andre. She stepped forward and tried to touch me. I backed away from her like her skin was made of acid and slid past her. I heard her call my name and ran out the door, slamming it behind me. When I saw her silhouette in the doorframe, I was already pulling out of the driveway. With a squeal of tires, she became a speck in my rearview mirror. Next chapter. Andre, I heard some disturbing news today. I was lying on my bed playing Street Fighter II on my Super Nintendo when my mom walked into my room. She stood in the doorway with her hands on her hips, a disappointed look on her face. What have I done? I asked in an annoyed tone. I mentally checked the list that all high school students make when their parents are vague about what offense they committed. Was it time for the report card? No, not for another month. Did I forget to do the dishes? I didn't clean it, but we haven't had dinner yet. Did I get reprimanded again? No. Since I got in trouble for stink bomb in the women's restroom, I keep my nose clean. I heard you brought Christina Huntsmith to tears the other day. Care to tell me what that was about? I was relieved that I wasn't in real trouble, so I carelessly replied, Oh, nothing much. We dated for a while, but I broke up with her. She started crying. That's all. Why did you break up with her? She asked. I racked my brain for a decent answer. Somehow I decided that saying, Christina doesn't hang out and Becky promised me something, wouldn't be too good. I just don't like her anymore, Mom. It's time to move on. I tried to be nice, but she got agitated and started crying. Is there another girl? Talking to my mom about this seemed weird. All I could do was look at her sheepishly and say, Yeah, I kind of like Becky now. And she looked at me like I'd said I kind of liked Hitler. Wait a minute, you don't mean Becky in a short skirt and top, do you? Yeah. Andre, why did you break up with a nice girl like Christina for this? Girl. Because we have more in common, I said out loud. She threw me an understanding look before sitting down on my bed. Andre, she paused, as if trying to think of the right way to say what she wanted to say. You can't treat girls like disposable toys. We're not here for you to play with when it suits you, and then toss us in the trash when a new, shinier one comes along. We're people with feelings. Yes, Mom, but what if your father had done that to me? She interrupted. What if he'd thrown me out because some other woman in a short skirt and halter top glared at him? What if he'd made me cry like you did with Christina and then shrugged it off like it was nothing? How would you feel about that? That silenced me. The image of my mom running away in tears gave me a sick feeling in my stomach. I wouldn't like it, I muttered. Exactly. Aren't you glad he's a man who doesn't treat women that way? Yes. I agreed crushingly. She smiled at me and lovingly stroked my head. Good. If you want an example of how women should be treated, look to Henry. Ask him questions. He's what a real man should be. When you treat a woman like a queen, she will always treat you like a king. Next chapter. I woke up abruptly. The dream, which was really just a memory from high school, stood before my eyes. Why was I dreaming about my mom? My foggy brain was a little confused as I looked around the unfamiliar room I was lying in. When my head cleared, memories came flooding back to me. After I left home last night, I had gotten a motel room. I couldn't get home to Tabby. Her numerous attempts to call me only resulted in me disconnecting the phone. Instead of dealing with her, I bought a 12-pack of beer and some questionable hot dogs at a nearby gas station. I then proceeded to eat my gourmet meal, responsibly washing it down with the beverage of my choice. Somehow I woke up with 10 empty beer cans. Upon returning, I turned on my phone to see what time it was. Surprisingly, it was a little after 9. Not surprisingly, there were about 20 missed calls, as well as 12 text messages. There were a few messages from my mom, which told me that Tabby had talked to her. No doubt Tabby had informed her that it had come to my attention that she was a round-heeled slut. She was probably on edge and hoping I wouldn't tell my dad. Okay, cell phone rings. I found one missed call from my dad. I didn't know what to make of it. Was he talking to my mom, or was he just calling to let me know he got there okay? I wanted to call him back, but I couldn't. I didn't know what to say to him. I wanted to tell him everything. He deserved to know. I was sure Mom hadn't told him anything, even if he had talked to her. But I just couldn't bring myself to do it. It's like mercy killing a wounded animal. You know it's the right thing to do, but it's hard to follow through. I didn't want to destroy his world at all. After all, it drove me to the brink of insanity, and she's my mother. How would I feel if she was my wife? I decided to accept it. I didn't call him, but I did the following. I sent him a short text message to see what was on his mind. It said, "Get home, okay?" Figuring he wouldn't respond right away, I hopped in the shower to wash off the smell of a homeless movie buff. I felt refreshed until I realized I didn't have a change of clothes. That meant I'd have to wear the same smelly garb I'd spent all of yesterday in. A 3-hour flight, a 4-hour drive, and a pity party with 120 ounces of beer. Afterward, I checked my message to see if he had responded and found that he had. It said, "Where are you? Tubby is freaking out. Says you guys had a fight and left." So he had really spoken to them. No doubt those lying women missed the reason we quarreled. Now he thinks I'm the bad guy. That's great. Typical. Did I even know them? Were all women lying bitches? It was time to take the bull by the horns. I stopped dodging what I had to do. Like I said, he had a right to know. I sent one last text before I packed my things and left the room. It said, "Meet me at Tony's. Just you. Don't tell Mom or Tubby, please. It's important." I didn't wait for him to answer. I knew he would. I just walked to the counter to pay the bill, got in my truck, and drove to his place. He arrived 20 minutes after I did. I had already ordered his favorite pizza and drinks, and they were on the table a few minutes before he walked in. "Hey, son. Wow. Pizza for breakfast? What are you, on a diet?" he muttered, taking a seat in the booth. I wanted to reply cheerfully, but all I managed to do was adopt a solemn look. He sensed my mood, and his smile was replaced with a concerned look. "Come on, Dre. Talk to me. What's going on?" I tried to say the words, but they stuck in my throat. They didn't want to come out. They wanted to stay a dark secret, but I wouldn't let them. "Mom's cheating on you," I finally spit out. The words hung in the air, filling it with heaviness. It took a moment for them to reach consciousness. I saw the confused look on his face turn to recognition. "What?" he asked with disbelief in his voice. I didn't bother to say it again. I knew it wasn't necessary. He had heard me. More than that, he believed me. His rhetorical question was simply a reflex that my message had gotten through to him. I felt terrible. The pain reflected on his face indicated complete agony. I felt like undoing what I had just said. I wanted to jump up and yell, "Gotcha!" I had jumped off the cliff, and now there was no turning back. I wished I didn't have to drag him with me. "When did you find out?" he asked. His words seemed choppy and his voice sounded cracked. "Yesterday." He shook his head sadly. "Do you know who he is?" All I could do was nod. I was about to tell him, but he beat me to it with his next question. "Was it Charles?" I gasped. "How did you know?" I asked, completely stunned. My father was immersed in his own world. He sat up and shook his head violently. "I thought it was over. I thought she would eventually take it out on him. I waited. I was patient. I tried to be a good husband. I gave her freedom. Then he slammed his fist on the table and yelled, "That bitch!" "Dad," said I, stunned by his abrupt reply. He looked up at me. The expression on his face was strange. It was as if he was absent. He seemed surprised that I was still here. Why am I still paying for my mistakes? Why? I was doing everything right. Why is this still happening to me? He cried, his body trembling. Although he was looking at me, I don't think he was talking to me. His eyes glazed over, and he seemed somehow distant. I was instantly angry. Not at him, but at the situation. It made me angry that he thought it was his fault. I was angry at my mother for doing this to him. I was angry that I should have been the one to tell him. I was just furious. "Dad, it's not your fault," I said, trying to get through to him. He just shook his head. "Yes, it is, son. It's all my fault. It's karma. I tried to make it right. I've tried. But it always comes back." "What are you talking about? You don't understand anything, Dad. What did you do?" Henry, 23 years ago. The heart monitor beeped repeatedly. It must have been a blessing. Each beep was a sign that my daughter was still alive. No matter what it looked like, she was there. Somewhere out there. But she wasn't actually there. Her body was physically here, performing its daily functions as if everything was normal. But nothing was normal. Everything Cassie was, her essence, was gone. Her body was just an empty shell full of moving parts. "Please come back to me. Please. I've already lost your mom. I can't lose you too." I thought about it for the billionth time, squeezing her hand. What I wouldn't give to feel movement in the dead hand I was holding. Honestly, I would have given everything I owned for my girl to open her eyes for even 5 minutes and look at me one more time. But none of that mattered now. The long, hard decision had been made. Today was the day I was supposed to... Shit. I couldn't even bring myself to say it. As the impassioned doctors summarized and hypothesized about my daughter's condition and the likelihood that she would ever wake up, it all sounded so simple and dry, so cold, as if the mechanics were trying to convince me that it would cost more to repair my worthless car than it was worth. That's my daughter, damn it. My little girl. She's a human being, not some warm vestibule for storing donor organs. I wanted to be mad at the doctors. I wanted to be mad at the nurses. I even wanted to be mad at God. After all, he was the one who made it rain that night. It was his fault that a drunk driver was on the road at that exact time. He let that asshole run a red light and hit my wife and child. He took them away from me. But why did she even get behind the wheel that night? What was the reason she was on that road? Where was she going? Shut up. She was going to her mother's. She was supposed to be home with you, but she wasn't. She was leaving you. Shut up. She was leaving you because she caught you. She found the credit card statement you forgot to destroy. She saw the motel charges. You remember the motel, don't you? That's where you met that woman every Wednesday. You practically paid her rent from the money she charged you. Your wife knew you'd be there, paid the clerk for a spare key, and broke into the room. What did she see when she came in? What did she see? Shut the hell up. This is all my fault. Everything. I thought I was entitled to a little entertainment. After all, I was bringing in the big bucks. I was the owner of the house. My business started to grow. Everything fell into place. Everything was the way it should be. The only snag was my frigid wife. She was a wonderful wife and a wonderful mother. She believed in me when everyone else said I was crazy to start this business. It was the 90S. Real estate was the place to be. Why not go where the money was? But she knew I could make it work. Even when we lived in that shabby apartment, she believed in me. I loved her with all my heart. Unfortunately, I no longer lusted after her. For her, sex was a duty she performed for her husband. It was on the same list as laundry and cooking, and not even at the top of the list. I wanted a queen. I found such a woman. She was an escort. I found her through an ad in the local paper. This was back before the internet made such things so much easier. Of course, she didn't advertise herself as a prostitute. You had to know the language to decipher the code. Woman seeking a man for a mutually beneficial relationship was the exact phrase in Amber's ad. The first time I called her, I was so nervous. I didn't know what to expect, but I ended up getting the best thing that ever happened in my life. She was exactly what I wanted in a goddess. At first, the time with Amber played on my conscience, but as time went on, it got easier. I found myself thinking about morals less and less often, and it turned into a weekly encounter that I craved. If I missed a week, I felt the consequences. My mood would sour, I would get testy. I even justified it in my head. It helped with the guilt. I still thought I was a good husband. I loved her and my daughter with everything I had. I spoiled them both. Everything they wanted, they got. I just had one thing I did. It was nothing special. After all the good I'd done for my family, it shouldn't have mattered much. But it did matter. She didn't see it as a gain. All she saw was betrayal. Pain. That's why she'd ended up on this road. That's why she died on the operating table. And it's why I said goodbye to my daughter before they pulled the plug. Andre is the present. My father's whole body shook with sobs. The only thing I could do was sit there in bewilderment. This man, the one who raised me, was not the man in that story. They say there comes a sad day in any child's life when they learn that their parents aren't perfect. It was I think sobering is the right word. It was a very sobering 24 hours. I wanted to sympathize with my dad, but could only selfishly think about how everyone I loved and held dear had let me down this weekend. One by one, they let me down. Piece by piece, they shattered my ideas of what marriage should be until there was nothing left. I had no truth to hold on to. Dad, I don't know what to say. That seemed to upset him even more. The crying got a new impetus, and he sobbed into his hands. I had never seen my father cry before. Never. I hadn't realized what it was until that moment. So that's why you put up with your mom cheating on you? Because you felt you deserved it? I asked. It's karma, son. You and your mom are my second chance. I owe it to my daughter to be the best father to you that I can be, and to Cynthia, first wife, to be a great husband to your mom. Dad, I paused half a word to gather my thoughts. I wanted to find a PC appropriate way to say what I wanted to say, but I realized I didn't care about political correctness anymore. That's bullshit! I finally spat out. He looked at me with surprise on his face. I never swore at my parents, but I didn't let that stop me. You think you deserve to cheat because you were a shitty husband to another woman over 20 years ago? That's bullshit. Plain and simple. Andre, I'm still your father. No, Dad. It's your turn to listen to me, I said firmly. His mouth slammed shut. All my life, you and Mom have been feeding me all kinds of nonsense about the proper way to treat women. Well, you treated your mom right. No matter how you treated your first wife, you did the right thing with Mom. She had no right to cheat on you. And you sitting here letting her do it because of some damn karmic justice is a slap in the face to everything you taught me about being a man. That got him thinking. Things went quiet between us, but then I noticed he was looking at me with something in his eyes. It was respect. Not the general respect he gave me because he loved me, but the respect a man has for another man. He nodded with a slight smile on his face. He even laughed a little. You could feel the sadness in it, but it was still a laugh. It's not every day a son teaches his father. You mean besides on the basketball court, right? I've taken you to school plenty of times, man. I joked with a smirk to lighten the mood. Nah. It took him a few seconds, but eventually he laughed heartily. Old man? You call me an old man while you yourself are suffering from Alzheimer's disease. There's no other explanation for you having such a bad memory, he replied, patting me on the shoulder. The conversation turned playful, with each of us trying to prove our point about who belongs on the court. We sat like that for another 30 minutes, eating our food and having fun with each other, despite the gloomy elephant in the room. I knew my dad was making a brave face for me. I also knew that inside he was dying. And so was I. But we laughed at the pain, even if it was only for a moment. As we walked to our cars, my dad stopped me. "Hey, Andre, I just wanted to thank you. You're a man I'm proud to call my son." I nodded humbly in response to his praise. "Thank you, Dad. That means a lot." We stood like that for an awkward minute before I asked, "So, what are you going to do about Mom?" He just shook his head and exhaled noisily. "I don't know. I really don't. As long as I don't lose you, I'm okay with whatever happens." "You're never going to lose me, Dad. You don't have to worry about that. You have to do what's good for you." He held out his hand, and I squeezed it in a firm handshake. Then he pulled me to him for one last hug. "I love you, son. No matter what happens, don't ever forget that." "That's right, Dad. Same thing." 6 months later, I knocked on the door of my parents' house. I mean my mom's house. There was a time when I would have just used my key and walked in, but that time was gone. My mom and I hadn't gotten along since I told my dad about her and Charles. She felt insulted that I didn't come to her and at least try to talk to her before I went off the deep end. The rift got even bigger when my father filed for divorce. After that, she stopped talking to me altogether. She just became depressed and blamed me for her circumstances. I tried to get her to talk to me. I tried to build a bridge between us. She rejected all of my attempts. I think the only thing she wanted was an apology from me. She wanted an apology from me. How could it be any other way? She cheated and tore the family apart, and yet she's the one waiting for an apology. What the hell? As much as I value my relationship with her, there is no way I would apologize. If anything, she should have been the one to apologize to everyone. That's how we lived in this stalemate. After a month of outright rejection, I stopped trying altogether. When I gave up, a part of me died. After all, she was my mom. Despite everything, I still loved her. I was in pain too. Couldn't she see that? Tubby and I had deteriorated dramatically. We lived in the same house, but I was an empty shell to her. I guess some part of me was punishing her for the part she played in my parents' breakup. I could admit that. But a lot of it was simple mistrust. My attitude toward women in general had taken a sharp turn for the worse. After my mother's infidelity, her abandonment of me, and waiting to apologize for the consequences of her behavior, and my crumbling marriage, I had little appreciation for the opposite sex. They became deceitful, evil, manipulative to me. They were the enemy. I saw our society's double standard as an act of war. Every time I confronted them, they infuriated me. I even started a boycott of sorts. I stopped opening doors for women, stopped giving up my seat if I saw a woman standing, stopped complimenting them. Everything. Chivalry was dead to me. I saw it as a system of enslavement designed to turn men into will-less dogs. No one felt that more than Tabby. She tried to apologize for lying to me. She tried to make amends, but I wouldn't let her. I was stuck in my universe of anger and rage. Like me, she gave up trying to get closer when she was constantly faced with my abrupt rejection. She no longer greeted me when I came home. We no longer watched television together. Our once vibrant life went on life support. There was no laughter, no deep conversations other than about bills, no life. The only good thing about it was that my father was able to keep his business, which was one of his main concerns. Since he had been successful before he married my mom, and his lawyer was very good, he got it free and clear. However, he had to pay her alimony, and she got the house. But compared to him giving her half of his business, it was quite bearable. Today, my dad told me to go visit my mom. He said she would need me. The final paperwork came in today, and he wanted to make sure she was okay. It was one of those times I wished I was an only child. Why didn't I have a younger brother or sister to do this instead of me? It wasn't that I didn't want to see her. I was just tired of her rejecting me. How could she expect me to be her accomplice in lies and deceit, and even in front of her own father? I felt like I did the right thing. That's what they taught me, to stand up for what I believe is right, even when everyone else is against it. But then again, they taught me a lot of things they didn't believe in themselves. Why should it be any different? But I promised to check on her, and that led me to her house after months of not even passing by it. After knocking a third time and getting no answer, I considered going home. But a promise is a promise, so I used my key and opened the door. I was a little surprised that the locks hadn't been changed. I expected it to look different. This place had once been home to a family. My family. Now it was something else. Everything was the same as I remembered, but at the same time, nothing was the same. The only physical difference was the absence of all the family photos. However, that one missing component changed everything. It turned this house into nothing more than a beautiful tomb. I found Mom in the living room watching television. An unopened manila envelope lay on the coffee table in front of her. I didn't go in and sit down on the couch. I just stood in the doorway and called out, "Mom? It's me, Andre." She didn't acknowledge my presence. She just sat on the couch, ignoring me as if I was some ghost she couldn't see or hear. "Mom, I know you can hear me." Finally, she turned to look at me. There was still anger splashed in her eyes, but mostly they were filled with sadness. After a moment, she turned back to the TV again. "What do you want, Andre?" she asked in an indifferent voice. I came to check on you, to make sure you're okay," I said, trying to contain my emotions. "I'm fine," she replied in her lifeless voice. "I'm fine" is a phrase that means something completely different when said by a woman in that tone of voice. It doesn't mean, "I'm fine." It actually means, "back off." I was almost ready to turn around and walk away, but I didn't. Months of being shut down came to the surface, and it all blended into a ball of, "I don't care." "You know what, Mom? You're a real bitch." That got her attention. She turned to me, wrinkling her nose like an enraged bull. "How dare you talk to me like that?" I didn't back down. "Oh, now you want to talk to me? Is that what I have to do to get you to acknowledge me?" She jumped up from the couch and rushed toward me. "I am your mother, boy. I brought you into this world, not the other way around. Don't you dare even think you can come into my house and talk to me like that." "Do you hear me?" She growled at me, pointing her finger at me repeatedly. I stood my ground. This was the first conversation we'd had in months, and I wasn't going to whine and let it stall. "If you're my mother, then act accordingly. I'm your son, and you treat me worse than a stranger on the street." Her eyes were still full of anger. "You're my son, but that didn't stop you from stabbing me in the back." "I stabbed you in the back? What about what you did to me?" "Done to you? Done to you? Grow up, Andre. That was between me and your father. It had nothing to do with you." "You ruined my family, Mom. On top of that, you stole the foundation of my marriage from me. That has everything to do with me." "Stop it, Andre." "No, Mom. Don't you realize what you've done to me? Everything you taught me was a lie. Everything. Remember you told me that if I treated a woman like a queen, she would treat me like a king. Remember?" For the first time in ages, she was silent. I took this opportunity to say what I had desperately wanted to say to her since this whole thing started. "When I was growing up, you always told me to look to my father as an example of how women should be treated. I based the very idea of a man's role in a relationship on that. According to you, you were supposed to treat Dad like the king of kings. But you went and entertained a man who treated you like garbage. What does that tell me about marriage? Huh?" To her credit, the tears began to drip. She didn't start coming up with some rationalistic nonsense to twist things around and victimize herself. She didn't start looking to me as a scapegoat for her situation. She just stood there and cried silently. Then she suddenly squeezed past me and ran upstairs. I stood there for a few minutes, listening for sounds that might tell me what she was doing. But the house was big, so I didn't catch anything. After a minute or two of silence, I went looking for her. I found her in the bedroom. She was lying face down. Her shoulders were shaking as she cried. "Mommy!" "Go away, Andre," I heard her say. "Mom, please, talk to me," I begged. She continued to cry. I stood in desperate silence and watched her cry. I wanted to comfort her, but at the same time, I wanted her to suffer. When I realized she wasn't going to let me in, I shook my head and turned to leave. At that moment, I heard her words. "Don't go," she pleaded in a trembling voice, a barely audible whisper. It was so quiet, I didn't think I heard her correctly until she said, "Please don't go." I walked over to the bed and sat down next to her prostrate body. As she sobbed, I gently stroked her back, trying to soothe her. She cried into her pillow for at least an hour. I stayed close to her, touching her to let her know I was there for her. Even when hunger clutched my stomach, I stayed. When she got up, we talked. Really talked. "Why, Mom? Why?" I finally asked the question that plagued me every day. She shook her head sadly. "Because I never stopped loving Charles. He drew me in so much that I couldn't get rid of him, even after everything he did to me." "But didn't you love your father?" She looked at me for a moment, then shook her head sadly again. "Yes and no. I loved your father. Loved him, believe it or not. But I was never in love with him. I didn't love him the way I loved Charles. I know you want to hear something else, but I must tell you the truth now. I believe I could have fallen completely in love with him if I had met him first, but I didn't." "Then why did you marry him?" She exhaled noisily and wiped away a new tear rolling down her face. "Because of you." "Huh?" "Henry loved you, Andre. From the moment he saw you, he loved you. You two became instantly attached to each other. Plus, he was good to me. We had been dating for a few months when I realized I couldn't love him the way he deserved. I almost broke up with him a few times. But every time I was ready to let him go, I saw the two of you together. I couldn't bring myself to break up with him." "So you married him?" She nodded sadly. When he popped the question, I couldn't say no. I just hoped I would eventually fall in love with him like I did with Charles. "How long did you cheat on him, Mom?" She sighed and lowered her eyes. "I don't know. A few years. At least physically. And it wasn't permanent. It was a once and for all kind of thing. While you were home, I was a good wife. I took care of my husband. I was faithful to him. I made love to him when he wanted and tried not to nag him too often. And then, shortly after you went to college, I saw Charles at the grocery store. It was like a cruel joke of fate. He was with another woman. They were walking down the aisle buying shells for tacos or something. He had his arm around her shoulders and was whispering something in her ear. When I heard her laughing loudly, I started to get jealous." She burst into sardonic laughter. "Funny, isn't it? I was jealous of a man I hadn't seen in over 15 years. She paused, looking at the wall. I didn't add anything, even when she fell silent. This was her show. Her memories. I needed to know what happened, and I didn't want to stop her flow. When he saw me, we talked for a minute. It wasn't a big deal. After all, he was with another woman. But I could feel the spark between us. It went straight to my stomach and made the butterflies flutter. That's when I realized I still loved him. That selfish man." She paused again, tears streaming down her face again. But I still didn't say anything. I just waited for her to start telling me again. Then he started calling me. I don't even know how he got my phone number. But somehow he managed to, and he invited me to lunch. He said he wanted to apologize for the way he broke up with me. So I went to lunch with him. I didn't sleep with him that day, but it wasn't long before I crossed that line. "Did you feel guilty?" "Yes, I did. All the time. The first time I couldn't even look at Henry after I did it. I was so ashamed I couldn't even be near him. After a few days, I got over it. I showered Henry with love and told Charles that he should leave me alone. I was a married woman, and he had to accept that I had withdrawn. And how did it all come back? She smiled slightly with nostalgia. Charles never knew how to take no for an answer. He pursued me and wore me down for months until I gave in again. That's just the way it went on for us. We would get into heated relationships. I would feel guilty and ask him to back off, and he would relentlessly pursue me until I gave in again. It became our thing. Was it worth it? I asked. Her face darkened. It was the worst mistake of my life, she said simply. I didn't know how I felt at that moment. Anger and disappointment were definitely present, but for some reason I also felt sorry for her. She had a long and lonely road ahead of her. Who knows, maybe karma would even come back to her like it did to Henry. She definitely deserved it, but the realization that she deserved it did nothing to soften my sympathy. After all was said and done, she was still my mother. No decent son can fail to sympathize with his mother when she suffers, whether she brought the trouble on herself or not. Did he ever ask about me? I asked. I know it was selfish, but it was another question that plagued me. I didn't even know why I cared. My father, Henry, was and still is a great father. I didn't need or want anyone else. But there was still a sense of rejection. To know that the man who created me had walked away so easily and never wanted anything to do with me left a hole that no amount of hatred could fill. And to find out that he was still seeking a relationship with my mom, or whatever it was, for the past few years was another slap in the face. He wanted her, but not me. It was painful. I wanted nothing to do with him, but I'd be lying if I said it would be nice if he at least acknowledged me. She looked at me sympathetically this time. A little bit, Dre, she replied, knowing that wasn't what I wanted to hear. He asked what was going on in your life when we first met, and I showed him pictures of you at the wedding. I told him about your wife and how well you were doing. But he didn't really want to see you. He was just making small talk. I couldn't fight the queasy feeling bubbling in the back of my stomach. I loved my mother, but I was disgusted by her at the same time. The thought of her jeopardizing her marriage for this man who had heartlessly rejected her only son made me furious all over again. The very fact that she had any feelings for this guy kept me on edge. I fought the urge to lash out at her again. We sat on her bed in silence for a few moments. Then she reached out and took my shoulder. Dre, I know you're mad at me. I know I disappointed you and probably messed with your head by giving you advice I didn't follow. I'm really sorry about that. What I did was selfish and hurtful, and I wish I could take it all back. I just nodded in agreement. I couldn't look at her, so my gaze fell to the bed. She took my chin and lifted my head so that I was looking at her. Then she looked sternly straight into my eyes. I know I'm the last person who should be giving you advice. I know that. But I feel I have to tell you this before you repeat the mistakes your parents made. What mistakes? With your wife. I burst into a sardonic laugh. You mean the one who lied to me to cover for you, right? Yes, she lied to you. She was wrong. But I'm the one who put her in that position. She found out about me and Charles by mistake. One day she came in just as Charles was leaving. You slept with him in Papa's bed? I asked incredulously, raising my voice considerably. She shook her head vigorously. No, no, son. He knew Henry was out of town and tried to make a surprise visit. I didn't let it get that far. He tried, but I didn't want to do it in the house. When I realized he was going to keep pushing his point, I gave the go-ahead and told him he had to leave. When he left, we kissed. That's when Tabby saw us. I begged her not to tell you. I made her promise. She said she'd keep my secret, but she didn't like it. She convinced me to think about what I was doing and get it over with. You let him into Dad's house anyway. You may not have slept with him, but it was still disrespectful. I know. Like I said, if I could have changed anything, I would have, she said in an apologetic tone. I shook off my disappointment in my mom and asked, So how did Tabby go from not thrilled about it to covering for you? I broke up with Charles after Tabby caught us. It was a wake-up call. I stayed away from him for a while. During that time, Tabby and I grew close. That's when she really became my daughter. I guess a big part of me was grateful for her, and that made me love her even more. But by that weekend when you and your dad went out of town, Charles and I had rekindled our relationship. I was supposed to spend the weekend with Tabby. She and I were going to get manicures and pedicures and have a whole girls' weekend away. But then Charles called and said he had tickets to a new ballet going on in town. I tried to cancel with Tabby, but she was disappointed and kept asking why. She said she was looking forward to a girls' night out. Since she kept insisting, I had to be honest with her and tell her the truth. I never asked her to lie to you, but I think she did it because you knew she had to be with me. She didn't want you to ask her why it was canceled. That still doesn't absolve her of blame, I said. For some odd reason, I also wondered what kind of man takes a woman to the ballet on Super Bowl Sunday. Someone who wants to get laid, that's who. I know, Dre. But don't you think she's suffered enough already? Don't you think she has regrets? How much longer does she have to live in purgatory? I jumped up from the bed. It's not about making her suffer. I don't trust her. She lied to me to protect you. Your little adulterous liaisons were more precious to her than me. Her promise to you trumped her oath to me. Why should I trust her? She nodded thoughtfully. So, what are you going to do? Why haven't you divorced her yet? If you can't trust her, you should get rid of her and move on with your life. That stopped me dead in my tracks. No matter what, I had never seriously considered leaving Tabby. What Mom said next sent an arrow straight to my heart. I say this because I guarantee you, if you keep treating her like this, she'll leave you. Right now, she regrets what she did. She desperately wants to repair your relationship. But the longer you keep pushing her away, the less pain there will be. And the less pain, the easier it will be for her without you. You don't want to wake up the day she stops crying for you. Then she'll realize she's better off alone than miserable with you. Trust me, son. She will leave you that day, and there will be no turning back. As I drove home, I thought about what Mom had said. Yes, I was angry with Tabby. I didn't trust her, even though I knew deep down she hadn't cheated on me. But she was covering for a cheater, and it was really hard for me to understand that. But I also knew that I definitely didn't want to destroy my marriage. Underneath all that anger, I loved her. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't bring myself to trust her. I couldn't bring myself to let go of the fact that she was capable of keeping secrets that could hurt me. When you know a person is capable of something, it's hard to expect anything less from them if the situation calls for it. Upon reaching home, I sat by the roadside for about 20 minutes. I wasn't ready to go inside yet. I couldn't look into Tabby's eyes. I was standing on the edge of a precipice again. If you think about it, that's what love and trust is. It's like jumping off a cliff. You have to trust that there's something down there to stop you falling. Otherwise, all you will have to do is watch in despair as you fall toward an inevitable end filled with pain and death. I wanted to jump. I really wanted to. But I couldn't. I was no longer 100% sure there was anything down there to protect me. Out of nowhere, my father's voice came to me. Something like a furtive memory of one of the many lessons he had taught me. Son, when a man is faced with a seemingly impossible task, he does one of two things. He either runs away from it, or he tries to figure out how to do it. The answer doesn't always come to him right away. Sometimes the only thing he can do is to take the first step and fight until the answer comes on its own. If he doesn't fight, he can never win. The only question I had to answer was this. Was my marriage worth fighting for? Yes, it was. I loved Tabby. Unlike my parents' marriage, Tabby and I loved each other. We chose each other without conditions or hidden agendas. So I took a deep breath, put one foot in front of the other, and stepped off the ledge. When I entered my house, she was sitting on the couch reading a book. She looked up to greet me and then continued reading. Instead of leaving to go to another room like I had done before, I walked in and sat down next to her. She looked up at me again, this time with surprise on her face. Tabby, we need to talk. Instantly, she tensed up and her eyes filled with tears. It puzzled me, but I overpowered myself and continued talking. I want us to go to counseling. We've been in a cold war for too long, and we need to do something before we end up like my parents. She exhaled intermittently and sucked in a large amount of air. You mean you're not? Oh my God, Andre. I thought. With those words, she fell into my arms and wrapped her arms around me. I could feel her shaking as she cried on my shoulder. And suddenly the reason for her strange reaction became clear. Did you think I was going to leave you? No, Tabby. No. That made her cry even harder. Please, Dre, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have lied to you. I stroked her back. I know. But we have a lot more to overcome than lying. I have to trust you to make things work for us, but right now I don't. And I want to. I really want to. But I can't. It's not just the lies. It's also about why you did it. She let go of me and stepped back to look at me. I don't understand. You lied to me to help my mother deceive you. I think that says several things. First, you have no problem with cheating, as long as it's done by a woman. You told me many times that if I ever cheated on you, you'd cut my balls off. And yet you didn't mind my mother cheating on my father. Secondly, it shows that you have no respect for me or my feelings. You cared more about helping my mother cover her tracks than you did about how it would affect me. Those are two big hurdles to overcome. She nodded sadly. I understand. I didn't do it consciously, but I understand how you might think that. But I would never, ever cheat on you. No matter what you think of me, it's important to me that you know that. I thought about it for a moment. I didn't like what she had done. More than that, I hated it. But eventually, I admitted to myself that it must be hard for her. She was in a difficult situation. Yes, she should have told me, but I realized it wasn't easy. And I didn't really think she cheated. I know I told her that it makes sense that only someone who approves of cheating would cover for the cheater, but I also realized that maybe someone who doesn't know how to handle a difficult situation and is afraid of being the catalyst for a family breakdown might do what she did. Well, we'll talk about that in counseling. Like I said, we still have a lot to work through, but I'm willing to work on it if you're willing. She gave me another hug. I'm so willing to work on this, baby. I love you so much, Andre. You're the best man I know. Epilogue. 1 year later. I tried to hold back. I really tried. But I couldn't. Anger swept over me. He was there, 20 feet away from me, laughing, smiling, teasing me with every breath he took. Why had he managed to get away unscathed? After causing so much pain, why should he get a free pass from karma? I know my father would want me to leave. I know he would tell me to just forget about it. I could practically hear his voice sounding like a mantra in my head. But I couldn't let it go. I just couldn't. So I walked over to him. I thought I did it pretty calmly, but some who witnessed it said I looked like I was eager for a fight. Others said they didn't see anything like that. I just wanted to scare him a little bit. You know, make him feel the need to look over his shoulder at night. What I didn't expect was for him to say something that would make me snap at him and turn into the Hulk. Hey, I know you. You're my son, aren't you? I don't remember hitting him the first time. I don't even remember the second time. I only remember 3 guys pulling him off me while he groaned on the floor. I was hoping the judge would be lenient on me. I'd never been in trouble with the law before. I was a hard worker. I was a married man with a baby on the way. Yes, Tabby was pregnant. I thought I would get off with a slap on the wrist. After all, I was only guilty of taking out the trash. But I got lucky. For one thing, it looks like my mom and dad finally did something together. They visited Charles in the hospital. Dad asked my mom to get him coffee, and when she was gone, talked to Charles. Dad suggested that he drop the charges against me. He told him that he had turned the other cheek when Charles entertained his wife, but he couldn't do that when his son was on the line. His father then leaned down so his mouth was next to Charles's ear and whispered something that made Charles's eyes get big and a look of fear appear on his face. When his mother returned with the coffee, his father patted Charles on the chest as if they were two buddies. But there was something very unfriendly in his eyes. They were stone cold, almost evil. Fortunately, Charles decided not to press charges against me. He said he could not do that to his own son. His favor knew no bounds. But the DA decided to press charges anyway, even without his cooperation. It didn't go very smoothly, though. Different witness accounts made it impossible to prove that it wasn't just a fight between two men. In the end, the case wasn't convincing enough to pursue. He barely had time to put away the real criminals, and getting involved in a father-son showdown wasn't worth it. Sometimes karma works both ways. My parents never got back together, but they put most of the pain behind them. My dad stopped hating my mom after a while, and my mom was able to forgive herself. They were even able to be in the same room by the time my granddaughter came along. Neither of them ever remarried. I think they were both very tired of the relationship. They each married the other to right past wrongs, and now they didn't feel the need to go down that path again. Tabby and I went to counseling. We found a wonderful woman named Bethany Carter, and she helped us a lot. It took me a while to overcome the distrust I had for Tabby. I also had to fight the urge to redirect the anger and frustration I was feeling towards my mom onto her. As hard as it was, we never stopped fighting for our marriage. There were good days and bad days. After a while, the bad days became fewer. We realized that everything we were going through led to better communication between us. It turns out that when you jump off a figurative cliff, things change. Some things are destroyed and others are just damaged. However, those things that are truly indestructible survive the fall. The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.